Fuel control switch. Three words that has got everyone talking for the last few days. You look up online, everyone is an aviation expert saying and explaining aspects about this switch. And it all stems from the preliminary report of the crash of Air India AI-171. For those who are unaware, the report says that the fuel switches for both engines of AI-171 moved from the run to the cutoff position shortly after takeoff. This happened within a second interval of each other, and this happened at an altitude of approximately 625 feet. One pilot asked the other as to why did he switch off the fuel switch, to which the other pilot said he did not. The plane then lost thrust and crashed 32 seconds after takeoff. That has been the story ever since this report came out on Saturday. Now, among the many questions that this preliminary report throws up is this: who switched off the fuel switch? Was it the pilot, or was it some sort of a technical or electrical error? Now, experts are divided, and over the last few days, we've gotten you two absolutely credible and senior aviation experts to put this into perspective. Today, let's look at two contrasting reports from credible media outlets that shed some more light on this fuel switch story and what could have possibly led to this devastating air crash in Ahmedabad. Hello and welcome, I'm Shubham Chauhan. Let's get started. So the first story is from the Wall Street Journal that came out late last night. Yes, the same Wall Street Journal that did a story, an exclusive story on the preliminary report's findings days before the actual report was officially out. That became a talking point in itself, with questions being raised over how Western media got early access to an Indian report on such a sensitive topic. But let's look at the Wall Street Journal's latest story for now. The story, which was reported by Andrew Tangel, Shan Lee and Akash Hassan, looks at the role of the pilot of Air India AI-171. It says that it indicates that it was the senior pilot, captain of AI-171, who cut the flow of fuel to the plane's engines. The journal said this is based on the cockpit recording that captured the conversation between the pilots. The newspaper also cited people familiar with US officials' early assessment of this evidence. Now, AI-171, Ahmedabad to London Gatwick, was being flown by two experienced pilots, 56-year-old Captain Sumeet Sabharwal and 32-year-old First Officer Clive Kunder. Captain Sabharwal had a total flying experience of over 15,600 hours, and First Officer Kunder had an experience of more than 3,400 hours. The preliminary report says that it was Kunder who was the pilot flying, or PF, and Captain Sabharwal was the pilot monitoring. And now here's the explanation that the Wall Street Journal has given. Since Kunder was the one flying the aircraft, his hands would likely have been on the Dreamliner's controls entirely. On the other hand, Captain Sabharwal, the pilot monitoring, would have been more likely to have had his hands free as he oversaw the takeoff. First Officer Kunder then asked Captain Sabharwal why did he move the switch to the cutoff position after it climbed off the runway. The first officer expressed surprise and then panicked, while Captain Sabharwal seemed to remain calm. That is what the Wall Street Journal report has said. Now, a few things to note here. The official preliminary report had sparked curiosity by mentioning just one excerpt of this exchange between the pilots. Why did you switch it off? I did not do it. That's all the official report said. It neither specified who said to whom, nor did it put out the entire transcript from the cockpit voice recorder. An entire transcript would have put all speculation to rest. Now, the selective publishing of a vague excerpt has been called out by experts, saying that it doesn't give out the entire picture. The other part is that the official report fails to answer that whether the fuel switch was turned off deliberately or just accidentally. In fact, the report uses the word transitioned. The switch transitioned from run to cutoff seconds after takeoff and then transitioned back from cutoff to run. By then, it was too late. Now, the Wall Street Journal, which is a credible media outlet, based on their inputs and the assessment of experts that they've spoken to, they believe that it is likely that it was Captain Sumeet Sabharwal who shut off the fuel supply to the engines. That's because his hands were comparatively free, basically clearing the ambiguity that the official preliminary probe had left. India's Ministry of Civil Aviation and the Airport Accident Investigation Bureau, or AAIB, have called this report of the Wall Street Journal as one-sided. So that was the Wall Street Journal report. In fact, a few days back, we had spoken to Captain Mohan Ranganathan, one of India's foremost aviation safety experts. He too had told us that shutting off the fuel switch cannot happen without manual intervention. In fact, here's an excerpt from his interview that he gave to our managing editor, Sujit Nair.
The first thing you do when you start the engine is to move them to run, because unless this fuel is pumped in, the engine is not going to light up. And then the automatic start cycle starts. So If he moves the fuel switches from run to cut off, what it does is it shuts off the fuel supply to the engine. And when you move it from cut off to run, the engine electronic control and the auto start cycle starts, and it pumps in the fuel, and if the APU is running, that supplies the bleed air for rotating the motor, and the engine fires up. And this has got, the FADEC has got an automatic relight thing. So when it senses that you moved it, automatically the rest of the start cycle starts. So it is not something that happens because there is a power failure or a failure in the system. It has got to be deliberately moved from cut off, the run to cut off. It doesn't move back because of a failure. On takeoff, who's got both the hands on the control column? It is a co-pilot. Correct. Whose hand is free is the pilot monitoring. So the pilot flying has got both his hands on the control column and he's holding the control column to rotate for takeoff. It's shortly after takeoff when the engine switches are put off. So whose hand was near the fuel switches? It is the captain's, because he is the pilot monitoring. So this whole thing of one pilot says, why did you do that, why did you do that, is trying to mislead or confuse the issue. It's quite possible if the captain had moved the fuel switches to cut off, the pilot flying must have asked, why did you do that? And he must have immediately put it back because, you know, when you're caught doing something, your reaction is always defensive.
Now, several pilots and pilot associations have maintained that it is premature to pin any sort of blame on the pilot. A statement by the Federation of Indian Pilots put out by news agency ANI this morning has requested everyone to not jump the gun. Their statement says that speculative commentary undermines the professionalism of highly trained crew members and causes distress to their family. So that's one separate aspect of this. Now let's look at the second story that came around the fuel switch this morning. Remember, Wall Street Journal is saying that the fuel switch was switched off by the pilot. The Indian Express reported the other side of this story today. An exclusive report by Aditi Raja says that investigators probing the plane crash are closely studying snags that cropped up in the electrical and software components of the Boeing 787-8 series Dreamliner. These snags, it is believed, could have possibly triggered uncommanded actions. In other words, a technical or electrical fault, nothing to do with the captain. The Express story says, citing an official, that hours before takeoff from Ahmedabad to London Gatwick on the 12th of June, a pilot who was flying the same aircraft from Delhi to Ahmedabad reported a defect in something called the stabilizer position transducer. In short, this is a sensor that monitors the up and down movement of the flight, and it sends data in the electrical signals to the flight's computer system to ensure that the responses to the pilot input are accurate. An official pointed out that any malfunction in the sensor could result in cutting the fuel supply of the plane without manual intervention. The Express report adds that this malfunction was checked and then fixed by the engineers as per Boeing's manual. The official in this report also added that no way has this been zeroed down as the cause of the crash on the 12th of June. But the fact that such snags could happen and could trigger larger problems is an aspect that shouldn't be ignored altogether. The Express report also elaborated on the snags that this aircraft had faced. In fact, the same flight, AI-171, had at least two major snags in recent times before, of course, the deadly and the horrifying crash on the 12th of June. In December 2024, for instance, AI-171 flight, the same flight, Ahmedabad to London Gatwick, was cancelled due to an unresolvable electric snag. This issue was, however, resolved the very next day. And in 2015, the aircraft had made an emergency landing following a cabin air compressor surge, which is apparently a known issue in Dreamliners. Now, at least two occasions in the preceding 3 weeks, the Express report says technical logs had recorded warnings, including a fuel system malfunction that, of course, later turned out to be a false alarm. Now, net, as per this report, the Indian Express report, the history of this aircraft and the problems it faced, all of it will be scrutinized extremely closely by the officials concerned, just to check whether anything mechanical or electrical could have triggered an involuntary and unintended movement of the fuel supply switch from on to off. Now, at the time of recording this video, the government has not commented on the Indian Express report. Neither, and this is important, neither has it taken any press briefing clarifying all questions and ambiguities surrounding the official preliminary report. As per the international laws, a final report into this crash has to be published within 1 year of the incident. 12th of June is when the AI-171 crash happened, so 1 year since then, but that deadline is still far away. How the investigation proceeds further will be very significant to watch, as that will give us, or attempt to give us, a definite answer as to what happened to the fateful flight Air India AI-171. That's all we have for this report. Thanks for watching.